Welcome to tonight's webinar on climate change.
Climate change is already a reality in our lives. It manifests in too little water in the form of droughts, too much water or atmospheric rivers flowing through, and the threat of wildfire. We're all living this now. My mission for this talk is to present actions that, when taken, can give us a sense of empowerment and make us feel like we can lessen the impact on our lives and maybe feel a little more empowered to make a difference. So enough talk, let's get going. We've got two handouts for this talk that we'll make available to you at the end of the webinar. One is a checklist of all of the suggestions I'll be making in the three talks, and the other is resource links. I've combined these two handouts into one PDF file for you to download, so be sure to stick around for this. Too little water. The Palmer Drought Severity Index report shows the presence or the lack of water in California since 1895. Now, we have 1895 down at the left here, and this goes to 215. And I did a little bit of extra research on this as well to take it all the way to 2022. Now, the green bars represent the presence of water, and the orange bars represent drought years. Now, from 1980 to 2022, we've been in some level of drought 28 out of 42 years. That's 67% of the time. In this talk about too little water for use in the landscape, I'll be suggesting ways to set up your landscape to require very little supplemental water during the non-rainy season. Three of the main strategies for dealing with drought are: number one, lowering the water needs of the landscape; number two, optimizing the efficiency of irrigation; and number three, using alternative water sources. Lowering the water needs of the landscape. One option we have available to us is to convert our water-guzzling lawns into beautiful gardens with climate-appropriate plants and California natives that delight us and use a fraction of the water that lawns require. The water districts are literally paying us to take out our lawns and replace them with low water plants. These are screenshots of East Bay Muds and Contra Costa Water District's turf conversion rebates. Low water plants require a quarter the amount of water that lawns require in Northern California. This lawn here on the left represents 1,000 square feet of lawn that actually extends around the corner a little bit out of view of the camera. That 1,000 square foot lawn requires 25,000 gallons a year to be healthy. What a difference if we pulled out the lawn and put in low water plants. The area would then require 6,000 gallons a year after the plants are established. Now, rainfall is measured in inches, and so is plant water requirement. Now, what I've done with this slide is this is the rainfall that we have received in Richmond, California, where I live. And it's from this century, 2001 to 2022. And it represents the rainfall in inches in each of those years. Now, what I've done is I have also brought in the plant water requirement for, number one, high water plants, which require 33.2 inches a year. Then we have moderate water plants that require 21.2 inches a year. Then we have low water plants that require 8.4 inches a year. And then we have low water plants with at least an inch of mulch spread over the planted area, which require 6.2 inches a year. Now, This 25 less water with mulch, this is based on a study done at Texas A&M University where they found that just an inch of mulch covering a planted area lowers the plant water requirement by 25%. And this is because it suppresses or reduces the water that evaporates from the soil, the water that's lost to evaporation. Now, mind you, in Richmond, California, the annual rainfall, the historical annual rainfall used to be 25 inches a year. See, like right up in here where my cursor is. And this rainfall that I monitored from this century for 22 years, it only represents 15 inches a year. So in Richmond, we have received 10 fewer inches per year on average of rainfall. This indicates climate change, I would say. Now, this is very similar to the previous one, only this bar chart is a span of 1 year. So it's from January to December. And the blue bars, they still represent rainfall, inches of rainfall during each of these months. And this is historical rainfall, by the way. But what I'm showing with this slide is that California is truly a low water plant state. So look at this. We have high water plants in the red line and moderate water plants in the orange line. And we can see that only in November, December, January, February, and March does the rainfall take care of, just the rainfall itself, take care of high and moderate water plants. But then with the low water plants, the rainfall itself, just alone, the rainfall, that free water that falls from the sky, takes care of low water plants, October, November, December, January, February, March, April, and half of May. So almost 8 months out of the year, that free water that falls from the sky takes care of low water plants. So our challenge is to hold on to that water as long as possible. You see all these inches of water that fell January through May, to leverage that water and hold on to it as long as possible so that we can hold off using the potable water supply as long as possible, possibly through the summer, as far into the summer as possible, and possibly even into the fall. Okay, and how do we do that? Well, mulch is the lid on the landscape. We put a lid on it. That's how we hold on to water in the landscape from the rainfall. Mulch holds the moisture in the soil. It feeds the biological life in the soil. It helps to regulate soil temperature. It helps to suppress soil-borne diseases. It reduces weeds. So mulch is a really wonderful thing, and this can definitely help us to hold that water in the soil. Another strategy for water conservation in the landscape is to water all of your plants in the landscape as if they were low water plants. So this is an example here of a mixed garden. This is my mom's front yard. And when I planted this garden for her, I wasn't a water efficient landscaper. I was a pretty plant landscaper. So I put a bunch of pretty plants in, but they have different water uses. And I have to gear the irrigation to the higher water use plant normally so that they do well. So now we water this as all low water plants, and then just give extra water to those moderate plants that complain the loudest. So we water all of them as low water plants. So you might be asking, well, how do I know how to water these plants as if they were low water plants? How do I know how to do that? Well, there's a new web application in town. actually not in town, in the state of California. And it's called the Valley Water Scheduler, found at valleywaterscheduler.com. And this is a scheduling application where you can just program in all of the zones of your landscape, and it will generate an irrigation schedule for you. So then all you have to do is just tell this web application that each of your irrigation zones is low water use, and it'll generate a low water use schedule for you. So highly recommend that. Or is it time for a new smart controller? The smart controllers save so much water. I've installed over 50 of these, and I still monitor a lot of them that I installed like 15 years ago, something like that. And the average, the lowest water savings that I see is usually around like 45% right off the bat. And this is because they create a new irrigation schedule every day based on the weather. So what is a smart controller? It's an irrigation controller that self-adjusts every day based on real-time weather, or if it's a soil moisture-based controller based on soil moisture. And it's like a thermostat, only it controls water instead of heat and air conditioning. So is it time for a smart controller? Another strategy is to change out those inefficient sprinklers and put in efficient ones. Now, the bottom line here is considered inefficient and the top line efficient. Now, this fixed spray sprinkler here, the reason it's considered inefficient is because it just really blasts that water out. And with our clay soils don't even have a prayer of infiltrating or absorbing or accepting that water. So it's really much better to apply the water much more slowly. And these nozzles can actually be retrofitted into existing sprinkler heads. Another strategy is to decide parts of the landscape that you're willing to hand water. You know, if you have an area or two that's currently being watered by irrigation, try it with one area first. Turn off that irrigation zone and water it just with, say, warm up water from the house, water that you've recovered from the house that you're repurposing, and try that. So you need to answer two questions, ask and answer two questions if you're going to decide to hand water these parts of the garden. Number one is, how much water do these plants even need? And number two is, how much water am I giving these plants? Especially if I'm standing there with a hose with a nozzle on the end of it and I'm spraying and watering these plants. Well, for the first question, how much water do these plants need? I have in the resource handout a link to a web application called How Much Water that will tell you how much water in gallons any plant needs in the landscape in any incorporated city in California. So that can answer how many gallons, how much water does a plant need? And then to know how much water is coming out of that nozzle, a good thing to do is get a hose end flow meter. And these are really great. You just put it on there and you can see how many gallons are coming out of there. And they're priced anywhere from $11 to $300. Now, in the absence of having a hose end flow meter, what you could do is you could do the bucket test to see how many gallons a minute, what your flow is, the flow rate is on your nozzle on the hose. So what you do is you flow water into a bucket for 60 seconds. Then you measure the amount of water in gallons. And then this will tell you how many gallons per minute your spray nozzle applies water. So for instance, if you need to water a street tree and you find out that it requires 15 gallons a week, and you find out that your nozzle applies water or sprays water at a rate of 3 gallons a minute, then you know that 5 minutes a week, you're going to spray the water underneath the canopy of that street tree to water it. Okay, so then now on to alternative water sources. And the first one is that free water that falls from the sky is to collect rainwater. And I'm talking here about passive rainwater harvesting, which is catching the rainwater with the landscape itself. And I'll be talking about this a bit more in the third talk of the evening when I talk about too much water showing up. So you can see that the downspout for this house is emptying onto a dry stream bed. So collecting the rainwater with the landscape itself. All right, another one is alternative water source is to use water recovered from the house, warm up water from either the shower or the sinks, or maybe even water that you use to rinse the vegetables or anything like that. Another alternative water source is a gray water system from the house. The one that doesn't need a permit now in California is laundry to landscape. And there are lots of good resources, especially YouTube videos that demonstrate how to set up a gray water system. And you can send that water out to your shrubs and trees and even water fruit trees with it. Okay, so this is the last slide of this particular talk. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to suggest a different way of thinking about our sources of water. The standard is just to turn on the tap, but our potable water supply won't always be available for that option. When we're in deep drought, one of the first things to go is landscape water because it's not deemed as being essential. But if we can wean our landscapes off their dependence on potable water, then if and when that happens, our landscapes won't be phased at all if we've set them up correctly with low water plants and using rainfall and other alternative water sources. So here's the order of preference I'd like to suggest. Rainwater, first and foremost. Either passively capturing that rainwater with the landscape itself, or collecting it in barrels, tanks, and cisterns. The next one is recovered water. Recovered or repurposed from the house. Gray water from the house, like laundry to landscape. Recycled water from either the water purveyor or the sanitary district or the city. And then as a last resort, potable water. Okay, potable water either piped in from the public water supply or from a well on the property. It's time for me to go on to the next talk, which is the firewise talk. And so I'm going to go ahead and truck on to my second talk of the evening. Wildfire. In this wildfire section, I'll be covering the high points of protecting your property from wildfire. This talk is a summary of the excellent firewise talk that Hedwig Vandenbroek and Steve Danziger gave back in March. If you haven't seen the recording of that talk, I urge you to go to our YouTube channel and watch it. And speaking of that talk, I'd like to express my appreciation to Hedwig and Steve for making the following presentation available to me to present here this evening. So here we go. The threat of wildfire is the new normal. We need to learn how to live with this and take steps to reduce the risks. I invite you to ask questions in the Q&A about wildfire. We have 2 wildfire experts in the background answering questions, so fire away. Oh, bad choice of words. To reduce the risk of wildfire, we need to be diligent about setting up our landscape in such a way as to slow the feeding of the fire as it nears your home, starve it when it gets really close, and reduce the risk of embers igniting the home. This graphic shows a property that's fully at risk for wildfire entering the landscape and swiftly moving toward the house. And this one shows the same property with the risk factors removed. I'll be covering each of these zones that are shown in this graphic. The most important measures you can take are home hardening, which is taking appropriate steps to greatly improve the chance of your home and structures withstanding ignition. Creating and maintaining defensible space area up to 100 feet out from your home is a good way to harden your home and property. Defensible space. This is a common term these days. In California, we use the model of 3 subzones of defensible space that cover 100 feet surrounding the home. The idea is to interrupt the path of fire, slow it down toward the home until firefighters arrive. The basic concept is to reduce the possibility that radiant heat will build up on your property, and also to reduce the potential that embers or flames will ignite the vegetation near the house. Zone 0, near area, is the ember-resistant zone. This is from the home and up to 5 feet out from the home. Zone 1 is the mid area, also called the lean, clean, green zone. This is from 5 to 30 feet out from the home. And Zone 2, the far area, 30 plus feet. This is the reduced fuel zone. Zone 0, 0 to 5 feet from the home. Remove as much of the combustibles as possible. Make this the ember-resistant zone by eliminating receptive fuel beds. This includes leaves, pine needles, mulch, wood chips, debris, dead vegetation, wood piles, propane, and other flammables. So many of us use wood chips around the home to suppress weeds and retain moisture in the soil. But wood chips and bark mulch will ignite and become flying embers during a wildfire. You should try to clear it a minimum of 2 feet from the house. Zone 1, 5 to 30 feet from the home. The goal here is to eliminate connectivity between islands of vegetation and the home. Lean is the area directly at the home. Fire codes specifically address much of this. Ladder fuel refers to live or dead vegetation that allows a fire to climb up from the ground and into the tree canopy, where it's more difficult for firefighters to fight a fire. This is called the laddering effect. This includes tall grass, shrubs, dead trees leaning against each other. The idea is to create distance between fuels so that fire can't easily jump from one source to another and possibly go to the roof of the home. Ideally, all branches should be pruned to provide 6 feet from the ground to the limb or shrub to limb, or 3 times the height of the shrub under a tree. If you're pruning tree limbs or shrubs, ensure you're doing this at the correct time of year and using proper methods, or you may permanently damage the plant material. Clean. Clean is about sanitation. Think about this as outdoor housekeeping, as it's an ongoing process, just like cleaning the home. Green. All plants will burn, but healthy, hydrated plants add protection since they don't burn so easily. Zone 2, 30 to 100 feet from the home. This is the reduced fuel zone. Reduce energy and spread of the fire by eliminating continuous dense vegetation vertically and horizontally. If possible, there should be a separation of 10 feet between trees on flat ground and more on slopes. Always maintain the vegetation in riparian areas to protect waterways. Now, here are a few notes about mulches for firewise gardens. In zone 0, non-combustible zone, this area requires truly non-flammable mulches, which excludes all organic mulches except well-rotted compost, where you see only small amounts of woody bits. Mushroom compost mixes often qualify here. Otherwise, inorganic mulches for non-porous cement, for porous gravel, pavers, mix of gravel, and secure stepping stones. In zone 1, the lean, clean, and green, still the same sort of mulches as above in zone 0. And in zone 2, 30 to 100 feet from the structure, here you can use compost and large wood chip. Wood chip has no fines, which are crushed leaves and twigs, or bark, just the interior trunk. This also reduces the chance of tree diseases substantially. Use no deeper than 4 inches. Deeper wood chip can hide smoldering fire underneath, which is difficult to detect and to put out until sustained winter rains come. Here are a few excellent ways to get connected and notified of potential emergencies in your area. I'm not going to read these off to you individually, but you will find them listed in the resource handout. When it comes to wildfire, no single person can protect a community. First, we have to work with our immediate neighbors. If your neighbor's property isn't fire safe, chances are your firewise property will not survive during a wildfire either. So, a big takeaway message here is to get connected and get involved with your neighborhood to make fire safety a community effort. This way, everybody wins. Okay, too much water. This section is about too much water showing up in the form of atmospheric rivers. You'll see that I suggest to try and hold on to that water as much as possible. Well, this is an extreme example. These homes are inside one of the levees on the Delta. I just wanted to acknowledge what happened this past winter. In this section, we're dealing with too much water on your property and in your landscape. This suggests drainage issues on the light side and more serious issues of flooding, landslides, and uprooted mature trees. So many of these issues and challenges are beyond our control, even as do-it-yourselfers. So I'll be suggesting actions that you can take that can make a difference in how your landscape receives and deals with rainwater. For the most serious challenges, it's best that you seek the help of professional arborists, engineers, and contractors. Trees are more likely to blow over in high winds if they're not pruned and thinned regularly. And this is what Hedwig was talking about. Open up those trees so that the wind can just blow through them and not blow them over. And we suggest that you use arborists for maintaining the canopies of large trees so that they'll be less likely to end up like the tree in this picture. The home gardener should try to slow down the flow of water piped into the storm drain system, reducing peak flows in our creeks. Diverting water from roofs and hardscape into rain gardens and through dry creek beds are two ways of doing that. In the case of the landslide in this photo, there were multiple causes. Very high peak flows, which undercut steep, unvegetated banks, completely saturated soil, and high winds, which caused century-old trees to fall over, causing further erosion. And this backyard fence here, that after this photo was taken, sometime after, that backyard fence ended up in the creek. So green filter as opposed to gray funnel. The historically used system for conveying stormwater with pipes, catch basins, curbs, gutters, channels, storm drains, and other human-made impervious materials doesn't allow for infiltration or use of natural systems such as soil or plants. These days, we're moving towards green stormwater infrastructure. While gray stormwater infrastructure is designed to move urban water away from the built environment, green stormwater infrastructure reduces loads on local creeks and treats stormwater at its source while delivering environmental, social, and economic benefits. So we see sinking that water into the landscape as opposed to funneling it directly into the storm drains, which ends up in the creeks and waterways and ultimately in the ocean, the bay, the rivers. And so why keep stormwater from reaching our waterways? Well, there was a multi-year study done in 8 neighborhoods in Northern and Southern California, and they found significant loads of pesticides and fertilizers flowing from the storm drain outflows into the waterways. This is a picture of an outflow. And these outflows happen year-round due to irrigation runoff. And the water from the urban areas is contaminating our waterways. The most common chemical found here in these outflows is ant poison. And those chemicals are ending up in the water and affecting the fish and wildlife that depend on that water. So there are now laws in place requiring new construction to capture the rainwater that falls on the property in bioswales and other landforms that capture and filter the water and sink it down into the water table. Catching and storing rainwater in your garden helps recharge the groundwater while reducing the amount of potable water needed for your landscape. This photo demonstrates rainwater harvesting passively with the landscape. Notice that we're not showing cisterns, tanks, and barrels here. Those are definitely a viable option, but this is about using the landscape itself to store the water. I'm talking about sculpting and shaping the landscape in such a way as to use the landscape to capture the rainwater. Dry riverbeds and rain gardens are not only aesthetically pleasing, but they're also functional parts of the landscape that aid in using free water to keep the plants happy and thriving. So this is an example of how we can take our individual properties and imagine it as a watershed in and of itself, a mini watershed, where the roof represents the snowy mountains and the rain gutters represent the rivers and streams. And so the rain hits the roof, the snowy mountains, and it flows down the rivers and streams and ends up in the landscape, which is the aquifers. So we sink that water into a living sponge of the soil, of the landscape. So they like to say, slow the water off the roof, spread it out, sink it down, and store it for as long as possible. This is a cross-section of a rain garden. And you can either build this or you can have it engineered. And the mix of the soil underneath to really sink that water down so that it doesn't become a pond and a vector for mosquitoes is that the soil is made up of 60 to 70% sand and 30 to 40% compost. And this media, you can actually get this media that's called biotreatment soil media or BSM. Now, here are a couple of examples of land sculpting. This is a project that I was helping out with in Sacramento. And they were sculpting the land and making berms and swales and rain gardens here and there. And then it rained, and came back the next day and saw, wow, the rain gardens really work. So it's very cool to see that happen. And some of the plant species that can be used in rain gardens are, let's see, Juncus patens or gray rush, Chondropetalum or cape rush, Carex tumulicula, Berkeley sedge, Muhlenbergia, capillaris, deergrass, blue fescue, lomandra, alimus, ceanothus, epilobium, achillea. It can just be really beautiful, gorgeous. And I'll be showing you a picture in just a couple of slides of this. All right. So then this is that same project, and the earth, you can see it's a little more bare so that you can see these berms and depressions a little bit better. So it's just, and this is well within our reach, is to sculpt the landscape. And one thing I like to recommend is that this past winter, we had a lot of water happening in our landscapes, and just to observe that and see where the water wants to go and utilize that. Don't figure out how to get rid of that water, figure out how to hold on to that water. Now, this is a finished rain garden, and it's a stunning existing functional rain garden. Now, it's not only really beautiful, but according to the person who lives here, the rain garden handled last winter's atmospheric rivers just fine. And look how beautiful it is also. I want this rain garden very much. Okay, here's some eye candy for you. Dry stream beds are aesthetically pleasing. vehicles for sinking rainwater into the landscape and storing it. So that is a strategy. Hold on to that water. Here are some cisterns, tanks, and barrels. And this cistern here actually is belongs to a friend of mine, and she actually might even be attending this webinar. And she has two of these, and she said the rainy season fills up those tanks, and she's got a lot of potted plants on her property, and those barrels water her potted plants all the way through the summer, or cisterns, I should say. So cisterns, tanks, and barrels, as well as capturing the water in the landscape itself. And here's a fun one, and then just your standard barrel type. Now, the most desirable mulch for too much water. So you'll notice that I mentioned mulch in all three of these talks. And it's because mulch is so very, very important. Now, this is a comparison between uncomposted wood mulch and composted wood mulch. Now, you'll remember that in the firewise talk that I just gave, I told you that the composted wood mulch is good for firescaping. Well, it's also good for putting in rain gardens and bioswales, composted wood mulch. And they call it biotreatment wood mulch, or BWM, composted wood mulch. And some of the benefits of composted wood mulch are that it inoculates the mulch with beneficial organisms and soil media. It holds more water. It floats less, so it's heavier and less resinous. It's less flammable, and it reduces pathogens that might be in the mulch, like sudden oak death. Okay. Now, when I talk about mulch, what I want you to understand that the mulch really needs to be in direct contact with the soil, okay? Not on top of weed cloth or landscape fabric. Now, because landscape fabric, weed cloth, over time, even if the manufacturers claim that it's got big holes in it for the air and water to pass through, that weed cloth does silt up over time, and they all do that. So then over time, this weed cloth then becomes an impermeable surface that the water just sheets right off of. Aside from actually the biological life, the micro and macroorganisms that are underneath that weed cloth, they either go dormant or they die. So this is in my backyard, the house behind us. They were going to sell the house, so they staged it. And they laid out weed cloth, put a few plants in, and ran a drip line around to the plants. Well, a couple of years later, the plants weren't doing very well. They pulled up the weed cloth, and look what they had underneath it. Dead, dead, dead. Dead everything. Dead soil, most likely no microorganisms. And this was just an impermeable surface then. So then this photo is the same property, but it was the winter before, where what I like to say is that weed cloth over time becomes weedy cloth. And so the weed seeds blow in from above and they take root, and it's really hard to get those weeds out of the landscape fabric because the roots grow down through it. So it's a weed cloth. It's just a nightmare. Just use mulch. Just use mulch to control your weeds. Mulch and or sheet mulching, cardboard, newspaper, whatever. Please don't use weed cloth. It's bad in so many ways. So then the object here is to hold on to water. And this is a cure or a remedy for that, the situation of us not having enough water. is that I suggested in that, how do we hold on to water? How do we accept that water, the free water from the sky, accept it and hold on to it as long as possible? And so we're always looking to convert any impermeable surfaces in the landscape to permeable surfaces. And here are some examples here. We have the pervious pavement. It can infiltrate, treat, and store rainwater right where it falls. And it can be made of various substances. This is pervious concrete here. These are plantable cells that people use to stabilize driveways, and then they plant in these cells also. You can put gravel in them. Here's some gravel and, of course, pavers here. Okay. Then, all right. So we're at the end of this talk, and we've covered a lot of ground here. And I hope I've given you many actions that you see as doable and valuable for preparing your landscape for dealing with the challenges of climate change, the challenges that climate change sends our way. I wish you all the best in being better prepared.